Hey guys, so for my first review, I'll be looking at Oregairu, or as it's called in English, my teen romantic comedy SNAFU. I don't know what SNAFU refers to, but that's what it's called. The premise to this anime is something that you've probably seen a million times by now. A guy who is sort of dissatisfied with his high school life so far is flung into an after-school club, a club which is home to two of the most beautiful girls in school. Now, before you start jumping ship already, this anime thankfully breathes some new life into this trope and manages to keep it somewhat fresh. How does it do this? Well, I'd say it mostly comes down to two things, the first of which would be the characters. It's especially refreshing to see more depth in this department when the genre is mostly filled with these one-dimensional characters who only ever struggle with that age-old question, does he love me, does he love me not? The characters don't just feel like these one-note archetypes, or self-parodies for that matter. Instead, it takes their tropes a bit more seriously and treats them like real, flawed, and multidimensional people. For the three main characters, we have Hikigaya Hachiman, who is the apathetic and pessimistic loner of the bunch. We have the silent and independent heroine, portrayed by Yukinoshita Yukino. And then we have the ever-cheerful and buoyant Yuigahama Yui as the second heroine. So story-wise, since this is a slice of life, I can't really say that too much happens in the way of a narrative. The developments we do see are mostly related to the characters, so each individual main character will develop or change as the show goes on, as well as the dynamic between the three main characters and how that changes over the course of the show. Some of it is hard to see at first, but by the end of the show, you'll definitely see how each of these characters have either grown or been challenged as they continue to face their own fears, or flaws, or roadblocks. Many of the minor characters are also pretty likable, and even if they're not explored to the same depth as the main three characters are, they each seem unique and interesting in their own way. For the other aspect that makes this anime different as compared to most of the others in this genre would be the dialogue. The dialogue was clearly given a lot of attention in the original light novel, and the show has definitely implemented that, though how the dialogue is handled changes a bit with time. And with that said, I feel like now would be a good time to segue into the differences between the first season and the second season. The first season had a lot more fast-paced, witty dialogue, where the characters would kind of banter back and forth. It felt really fresh and was mostly fun to follow. I mean, even if it meant having to read the subtitles faster than I'm usually used to. The first season also had a lot of interesting monologues from our MC, many of which delved into shrewd social critiques. Especially poignant to me was the exploration of the loner syndrome. The fact that the main character is mostly antisocial, quote unquote, isn't just tossed to the wayside or made light of and subsequently forgotten. It treats this issue with a measure of maturity, and seeing as personally I've also dealt with this and been that quiet and almost dissociated member of a community myself, I found a lot to relate with there. As for the second season, visually the show definitely got a pretty major facelift. The characters looked a bit less cartoony in a sense, and the art and animation generally felt more pretty to look at. And that's definitely not all that's changed. Season 2 also features significantly less monologues from Hachiman, our main character, and the dialogue is nowhere near as fast-paced. Rather than mostly being in the mind of Hachiman, we see a bit more of the girls, and the focus is somewhat more on their development as characters. And speaking of them, both of the girls are pretty much equally interesting and charming in their own ways. So suffice it to say, you'll easily find plenty of supporters in both camps as to who is best girl. Personally, I am absolutely not in any way biased as to who that is. Not at all.
Really, nigga?
Now, as for the dialogue in the second season will either be incredibly intriguing to you or really frustrating to watch. Never before have I seen so much been said in between the lines. There will be entire conversations that on the surface make absolutely no sense, just because the characters don't want to just come out and say what they actually mean, and instead will go on a roundabout approach where they somehow manage to convey their meaning by saying practically nothing at all. So if you're not ready to spend that considerable brain space to try and decipher what these characters actually mean between the lines, this aspect of the second season will undoubtedly frustrate you. Especially guilty of this was the final scene of the second season, where so much was said but not said that you'd be utterly confused without both the context and intense reading between the lines. So yeah, this might either be a plus or a negative to you. Personally, I found it to be a bit of both.
何一つ具体的なことは言わなかった。
So finally, I'll address my most major complaint with this anime. The finale is pretty much the most criminal cliffhanger I've ever witnessed. It is the absolute rage-inducing cliffhanger of cliffhangers, something I can easily testify to as hours after the credits rolled I was practically fuming about it. Not only is there not a third season planned in the near future, but the anime adapted until the next volume of the light novel, which has not even come out yet. So you can't even go to the source material for that. We'll probably have to wait for 2 more volumes of the light novel before we see what line is uttered next. In summation, I would say definitely check out this anime, especially if you like slice of life and like to see a bit more depth as to character dynamics and how characters develop and how they interact with each other. There's a lot of that in this anime, and it generally approaches things at a pretty mature level. But of course it's not perfect, and it by no means has a resolution yet. I hope you enjoyed this review, and please leave a comment letting me know your thoughts on it. And with that said, peace guys.
Yahari! Yahari! Yahari!